Hi, last four. So, yay, good job on making here, guys. I really can't believe how this semester is going. It does really feel like we just started and we are already at the middle of the semester. So, that's a good thing. We do kind of start winding down and relaxing now that we have made it here. So this week, hold on just a minute, let me pull up our PowerPoint. This week we begin looking at World War II, the second worst worldwide conflagration that we have had in human history. So, just a few of our housekeeping notes before we get into our lecture. Remember, guys, I know throughout the course shell it says 3 discussion posts, but just remember because of COVID-19, we could not change that. So, we are on the 2 post system for this semester, guys. So, you just need that initial post on Wednesday, and then you need 1 participation post by Sunday. Your week 4 assignment is due Sunday. This week you get to look at and examine artwork that is represent. I can't say the word representative. There we go, of World War II. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how to cite artwork in APA because there's a little difference to the formula there. So we'll go over that at the end. Um, Guys, if you have at this point, since we're at the halfway point mark in class, if there is any work that you have missing, any late work, please make sure that you are emailing and reaching out to me because we can always work it out for class, guys. I just need you to communicate with me. And then in saying that, guys, you know that I am here for anything that you would need. So, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions, comments, or concerns. And then just a note on the feedback, grading, turnaround. Remember, guys, discussions will always be on Tuesdays, and Fridays will always be your assignment grades. And I will post an announcement for those. And then as far as this week goes, you guys turned in your topic selections there Sunday. So those grades will be available for you tonight too. And I will post announcements for those so you guys never what your grade is. Look for your feedback. You'll know when you come in on the homepage, you'll see that announcement up there. But just so you know, Tuesdays and Fridays are always the days. All right, guys. So basically, when it comes to looking at World War II, I think this is probably one of the historical events that we really like to focus on. If you watch the History Channel, there's always seems to be something about World War II. Movies, there are so many movies that are made about World War II. It's definitely an event that fascinates us. And when we look at World War II, when we look at this time, this whole historical period in general, it's all about analyzing those fascist dictatorships and that rise of fascism in Europe and across the world in many ways, and how that is different from democracy. And so we always look at World War II as being this big battle for democracy. And so that's kind of why we say we study it so much in history. But in actuality, it really has to do more with people and the way that we engaged each other during this time. So it's those gross atrocities that people were committing, towards each other that are really what fascinates us. We like to think that maybe the Germans, they didn't know what was going on in the concentration camp, and I'm sure they did. Of course they did. It's just, there was probably some fear on their part as to why they didn't or could not stand up. And then, we have the idea, like we hear with the Nuremberg trials, the trials after World War II, where a lot of those SS higher up officers were, they were put on trial and charged with those atrocities that they committed against the Jewish population and those mother minorities. And so the common rhetoric was that we were just following our orders, we were just doing what we were told, and so that really makes us has to take that pause and look at human behavior and as varied as it is, why do we go to those extreme behaviors, and then why do we scapegoat ourselves out of them, because that, oh, I was just following orders. That's just another form of scapegoating. So we'll get into all of that a little bit more. So what we see is, once again, we see this kind of we see those changing governmental systems starting with the 19th century. So remember, much of Europe was under that feudal system for a really long time. So society really was divided between the people at the top and the people at the bottom. You had the rich and the poor, and the Industrial Revolution allowed for that middle class to start being formed. And what that meant is that it opened options for people. People had more control over their destinies. It's like Woodrow Wilson's 14 points there that I've talked about a few times. That idea of self-determination. The Industrial Revolution gave a lot of people in Europe that freedom. And so, what goes along with that, of course, is those changing governments. So we see those monarchies starting to collapse, and we see more of these open type governments and more choices, because now, other than a ruler who is born into it because of blood, right? That whole divine right of kings that existed in Europe there for many centuries. Now, people had options. People could choose whom they wanted to run their country. They could choose whom they wanted to support. And we start seeing all these different kind of political ideologies, and the beginnings of these different groups that we see. So, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, socialists, and the independents, those all formed back at this time. And then throughout history, they've changed. So, like the way we see like the values Republicans have now, they're really not the same as when they first started. It's kind of interesting here in America that what we consider to be democratic values were actually the Republicans initially, and then they changed. I can't remember why. Might have had something to do with Jimmy Carter. But anyway, my point is that the way we view those political parties now, with that they're not quite the same, because like everything in life, things do kind of have to evolve, grow, and change, right? So my point is, so now people are open, they have all these different options. This idea of democracy kind of means more independence for the individual. And so these fascist leaders, we have to remember, they didn't come in beating people upside the head. They came in appealing to people and appealing along those lines of building people up as individuals, restoring a sense of the past, this nostalgia that these countries had in the past, because these main countries that we see turn to fascism. If we go back to go farther back into their past, we see at one point in ancient history that they were dominant there in the European culture, and a lot of what we have today is because of those different fractions, right? I mean, at one point the Germans were Germans ruled a lot of Europe there, and they successfully fought. They actually successfully overtook Rome, but for some reason they just all packed up and left, because the Germans were viewed as the light barbarians and the pagans, and so they think that's probably why they left. They didn't like the civilized city of Rome. And then at the same time, it would could have just been, hey Rome, look, we did it, we beat you. Leave us alone. We're going home now. It's like, who could say? And then Italy, we look at, Italy, if not for them, we wouldn't have a lot of the art and culture that we have now. And we wouldn't have a lot of those democratic ideas, and ideas on how to run societies, and governmental ideologies that we have, if not for Greece and Roman culture, right? And then one of the fascist dictators we don't talk about a lot, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Franco or Francis over there in Spain, and we have to think about Spain too. Spain was one of the first ones in the 1400s that got out and started exploring the rest of the world. So, Spain had a big hold over here in the Americas, pretty much before the English kind of got them out. But, especially when it comes to the southwestern part of the United States and then down into South America. Spain was very powerful at one point, in the 1600s there. And then we go and we look at the other side of the world at our, and then Stalin. Hold on, let me go back to Stalin there. And then with Stalin too, we have to look at that whole history of Russia. And, Russia has always had this, they always had their monarchies. And in many ways, like we see with Catherine the Great, they tried to make themselves the example for everybody else to follow. With Catherine the Great, they had this idea of enlightened absolutism, and basically it was like your people are only going to be as smart as your leaders. That's a really good way to summarize that in a nutshell there. And so Catherine the Great was really big on educating herself, making sure that the Russian people were educated and things of that nature. And so we really see that with Lenin too, coming in with communism, because he originally started with it being all about the people. And then even Stalin actually came in and really changed the society and the economy around, so that people were thriving. And in many ways, a lot of people in Russia did like Stalin, because he did a lot of good things. It's those heinous things that he did on the side that we all question. But as far as people who elected him go, he was making their lives better. Same thing with Hitler there. He was making people's lives better in Germany, but it was at such an expense that it really makes us question those ideas of morality and just happiness, and just once again, how we all can come together and live and work in this world and these systems of civilization and culture and society that we have created. And so they appealed to people, and then we go, and they were like I said, once great countries. So then we go across the ocean to the other side of the, or across the continent actually, because we're in Europe, and we go over to Asia, and what do we see there? We see Japan trying to dominate and get rid of Western imperialism. And in Western imperialism, it wasn't just the United States influence. They were talking about those Europeans too. Britain had a big hold in Asia for a long time. France had a big hold in Asia for a long time, and we'll see how that comes to a head here in a couple weeks when we start talking about the Cold War and we look at the reasons for the Vietnam War. But Japan, when we go to their ancient past, we see that they were once a very great and powerful nation. The time of the shogun and the samurai during that time period. Japan had a lot of control over that area. So for them, it was all about making their country great again, going back to that way it used to be. And I think that's where, excuse me, we as humans, we run into problems because, we can't go backwards in time. We have to move forward. So, in my thinking, if we were great in the past, then, we don't regress back to that. We find a way to make that, improve on that and make that better and make that something that we can share with everybody. Because, you can't share things like that by beating people upside the head. Remember, that was Freud's kind of main idea. We were either, the Eros and the Thanatos. We either have that life, sex drive, or we have that death aggression drive. And we know that either way, we've got to have a balance there. And we can't just go with those primitive instincts, I guess is the good way to say that. And so, this is all and this was all stuff that people were dealing with, and the way that these leaders were presenting themselves. And you have to think people were really demoralized after World War I. So it was a good morale booster to hear about. Things may be really bad and crappy right now, but remember, guys, this is how we were in the past. And it was kind of that this isn't going to last forever. But like I said, the way where I think they went wrong is by saying the only way we can be great again is by getting rid of, these certain groups of, not even real human beings. And that definitely creates the problem, right? We've been talking about that since the beginning of class with social Darwinism and imperialism. And so, in thinking about that, we have to look at some of those policies, I guess, or doctrines we can say, as I have written on the slide, that Hitler instituted. So, basically, when he got elected, they scrapped the whole Treaty of Versailles. We know the Treaty of Versailles. That was one that blamed Germany for World War I. There were a lot of reparations, monetary reparations that Germany had to pay back, especially to France, which is kind of important looking at World War II here and kind of France and Germany's relationship. And then they had a lot of their land and a lot of their colonial territories taken away from them. They had to, disarm their military. And so, Hitler, he automatically started building back up their military when he got into office. But the problem is that he was very charismatic and charming. So he was going to, those treaty conferences that they would have, and he was pretty much buttering everybody up and like, no, it's okay, not doing it, nothing bad going on here, kind of don't look at the man behind the curtain, and even though I think it was Churchill that was a little suspicious of him, most people were kind of duped. And at the same time, I think that everybody was so focused on rebuilding themselves after World War I and building up their economies, that they did take it on good faith that what he was saying was true. You know what I mean? And so, one of the first things he did, like I said, was start reassembling the military and starting to take back land that he claimed was, meant for the Aryan race, meant for the true human beings. And so, one way that they would take back land had to do with this doctrine, we'll say, of Lebensraum. I'm sure I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But basically what that was based on was just this whole idea of land and resources. And in order for, you know, the Hitler's superior Aryan race to propagate and be able to live a good life, they needed more land, and so and so basically what they would do is they would starve people so anybody that wasn't of the Aryan race that lived in a certain area, like say Czechoslovakia, they would starve those people out, and basically then once they were dead, then they would move in, who they considered to be the true Germans there, and that's something we see in the Soviet Union, and we also see that policy enacted in Japan. So that's a little scary to think about, huh? And so, also what we see are new alliances forming. So once again, we know we had these kind of buddy systems there with the beginning of colonialism and imperialism, and so we see those systems changing. Just like we have friendships change in our personal lives. We see that on these higher collective levels too when we look at whole countries, right? And those new alliances are kind of where we start seeing more of these nefarious agendas presenting themselves. And then the main thing we have to remember with these fascist governments and their tantalizing appeal to people is that they use psychology. They use this propaganda and pretty much brainwash people into these false ideas. And if it wasn't for the people, we might have a different history. It's really hard to say. But my point is that, once again, when we talk about history, we seem to only focus on a few people, these few figureheads that we consider to be great. And the rest of us, because, maybe some of you guys will go on and be these specific people they talk about in history for good things, right, guys? Not as fascist dictators. But for the most part, most of us are back there in the background, like in this picture. We're those nameless faces back there that nobody's really telling their story. And it's really, not only were they exciting and tantalizing to people, but fear. There was a lot of fear that was used too, and I think that's where we have to be cautious as human beings, is not giving into that fear and not allowing other people to take that power from us by putting us into states of fear. And that would explain why we do see so many atrocious, gross atrocities against people during, in the concentration camps. And then, we have to also think that the idea of, the people were taught that these people they were doing these atrocities to were not human beings. And, that's the biggest one we have to be careful of right there when we start breaking ourselves up into, into those kind of um, polarities is a good way to say that. All right, so basically with this slide, it's just a map that's showing us the changing face of Europe. So, every week we get to see a little different illustration of the what the world looked like. And, as we move closer to the end of class, we'll start to see it come together and look more like the world we live in right now. But basically what we see in this map is we just see kind of the German military is what we're mapping out here. We're showing kind of their what's the word I'm looking for? Their march, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The way that they spread out their march there. And what's really important here is I want you guys to kind of, try to. I know we can't all remember every country and all the names here, but I just want you to, kind of take a look at that and look at those different countries because, like I said, once we get to the Cold War era, we're going to see these areas. They get even smaller as we have more people finding their voices and independence and lifting off those shackles of oppression and getting to stand up and be counted and a part of the world scene. And so it's very interesting to look at the maps and look at how they do change along those cultural lines and then especially along those geopolitical lines. If we go and look at the bottom of the map, I think the geopolitical aspect makes a little more sense because when we look at the continent of Africa, when we look at the Middle East, we have to remember that these countries are very, very new and very young. There were cultures that lived here, and of course, their descendants still live in those areas, but the cultures that lived here before colonialism, they called themselves different names. They didn't have these lines drawn on the map and to say, this is mine, this is yours, you stay over there, I'll stay over here. They had their different ways of I guess, routing all of those types of stuff and working with each other. And so, a lot of conflict that we have seen since World War II in these areas has a lot to do with those geopolitical lines and with imperialism and colonialism and just, people's frustration with the outcomes of some of those acts. All right. And so when we look at World War II, we know it was, even bloodier than the Great War. World War One, we know that there were, I think it was something like 60 million people were killed, and I know at least 11 million people were killed in the concentration camps. About 5 to 6 million of those were of the Jewish culture, and then that other like 40% there were, like I said, Catholics, homosexuals, anybody that wasn't European, anybody that was European but wasn't German, the Bolsheviks, Catholics, people with mental and physical disabilities, and just anybody considered a general, just what's the word? Just a general troublemaker or not with the Nazi policies. Those people got put into concentration camps, and some of the psychological um, and medical experiments that were run on people were, oh wow, there's some pretty heinous stuff that was going on there. It's kind of interesting though that even as heinous as those human testing subject or those human experiments were, there's a lot that we've learned about genetics and human development because of what was going on. So, yeah, that's where psychology gets real tricky. And we actually have ethical codes now so that we don't do those types of things to people anymore. So, you guys see how, history isn't something that's detached from us. It very much is a part of maybe we don't see its influence daily daily in our lives, but there's definitely influence there, and we can see that it's still dynamic, and it's still an ongoing process. That's kind of what evolution is. It's this ongoing process of change and growth. And there were many battles fought during World War II. Very, very, a lot of monumental battles that we, still have some people alive today who fought in. And with our discussion this really get to break those battles down and look at what was going on. And the main thing I just want to highlight here was the Battle of Stalingrad, because when it comes to Stalingrad, this was the final resting place for Hitler's plans to take over the world. And it wasn't that the Russian soldiers were more advanced than Germany. It wasn't that they were smarter than them. What took the Nazis out at Stalingrad was nature. It was the weather. It was just simply too cold. They were ill prepared, and they had no choice but to uh, uh, call defeat at that point, because basically from that point until you get to like Korea, because even Mongolia is pretty cold. But once you get to the other part of the continent, it's all that Siberia. So it's all cold tundra that not a lot of stuff grows in and stuff. So if they could have got through the winter, or if Hitler would have just waited until after the winter, he very likely could have made it to the U.S. soil and overtaken them and overtaken us at that time, right? So basically, what we see too with Stalingrad is because it was so cold. There were a lot of soldiers that they surrendered, they gave up because they had better chances of staying alive in the prison camps than they did out there on their own. Waiting to fight. And so that's just basically what we see with these pictures, is we see those troops. I believe they're prisoners, so we see them marching probably to their camp. And then, because of the conditions, not only of the environment, but how poorly people were treated in prison camps, we see that, vast majority of those soldiers died. All right, and so why I bring up Stalingrad too is because then this ties into Japan's role in World War II. So basically, if we remember our map we saw where the German troops were advancing. We saw how much of the area there on the European and African continent that they had claimed, and then we see they're starting their work their way east, because the game plan was to meet up with Japan, and then they would have been on American soil, I think, within like a week. I mean, it's kind of scary of how close how close this got to American soil, right? And so I bring that up because when we look at this picture, what we see in the top left, we see the Soviet Union, Mongolia, and China. So if we can try to, in our mind's eye, visualize this, but basically right to the left of where our map ends, just right there, kind of in that area between that area right above Mongolia and China. That's kind of where Stalingrad is. It's right, kind of southern eastern part of the country. And so I point this out because we see how Japan has basically taken over all the land there in the Pacific, and have taken over most of Asia and there too. And so, like I said, if they would have made it past Stalingrad, then they would have been there in kind of friendly territory, would have been able to get more supplies, more troops. And then if you see at the very top there, I mean, we're talking about a little over 1,000 miles, if I'm looking at my map scale and reading that correctly. Yeah, maybe like yeah, just like 1,500 type miles there from the end of the Eurasian continent to where Alaska starts. And like I said, if if Stalingrad, if they would have timed that differently, or just supplied their troops better, they could have met up there, and then like I said, it would have we would definitely be living in a different world now. And so when it comes to Japan, as I was talking about at the beginning of the lecture, their long history of kind of dominant in this part of the world, is one of the reasons why they were kind of on board with the world domination thing. And then at this time too, Japan was trying to kind of move up in the world stage. They were really big into the trade game and things like iron and oil. And so one of the reasons for the attack on Pearl Harbor and for Japan and the United States kind of going at each other at this time definitely had to do with trade wars. Japan was really big with oil and especially rubber. And so the United States, they kind of wanted to, it was like Japan was maybe number one and they're like number two or something. And so, we were trying to knock Japan out of that game so that we were dominating it. And that already had some harsh feelings between the two countries. And then, of course, once Pearl Harbor hit, that created a lot of bad blood. And then we have the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that really created some friction between the two countries, right? And it's just probably been here recently that we're actually starting to maybe build a healthier relationship with Japan again, let go of those past things. I would say in many ways we are. So, all right. So I basically just about Japan there. So we're just going to skip over that slide. That just gives us the date for Pearl Harbor so that we know. And of course, living in the United States, we usually have some type of memorial type celebration for the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so when it comes to World War II, it basically, they were lost once we got, once Stalingrad, like I said, if Germany would have gotten through, Japan wouldn't have been bombed. They would have they would have been a lot more. They would have taken over the world. I mean, it's hard to imagine that they would not have. But the turning point, of course, came when the United States joined the war. And it was kind of like when we joined World War I. All the other countries, they were a little demoralized, depleted, they were kind of out of resources, probably needed more people to fight. And so when the United States came in, it was like that new breath of fresh air. It gave everybody that optimism. It was like the cavalry came in and saving everybody. It's very much that mentality. And so we see that with World War II as well, because once not only were we able to come in and take over dominance of the Pacific there, those were some of the major battles during World War II that made it that made things look bad for Japan and Germany, like the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway. Those were really big battles there and gave us all the upper hand. And so then what we see is that when it came to defeating Germany, basically there was no niceties this time. It was like there was going to be unconditional surrender, and it was like they weren't going to play any games. There was no making of treaties of this is what you're going to do. It was like, no, you're unconditional surrender no matter what. It's kind of like if we have to blow the whole country up, we will put an end to this, right? And then just what I said, I kind of skipped ahead there, didn't? But those turning points there in Asia, there's those battles that I was talking about. And then, as I said, even more so than World War I, World War II was even more destructive. It kind of shows a little silliness on our part as human beings. We had just went through. Everybody has built themselves back up, built back all their houses and their cities, and then here, within the span of 2 generations, it all gets blown down again. I have to wonder, where did they get the materials to rebuild after World War II, it's like they probably are, if they already destroyed all the trees and everything with World War One and then rebuilding, it's like, where did everything come from again? Kind of crazy. And I guess that's where we see those advances in technology and different building materials come about, huh? And so with these pictures, it's just a good illustration of that destruction, and it's really a good, of why we shouldn't go to war. We have to find other ways to handle our differences and our grievances, and we're never going to always all get along. There's always going to be somebody that doesn't like you, and that moves up the social levels on those collective, to that collective top too. And we have to find ways to be okay with that and learn to work with that rather than going into that destructive mode, because we have to remember, at the heart of everything, it's us people that are the ones that are hurt the most by these events, right? And so that's what we really see with World War II, is that, it wasn't just people dying in battle, but, the damage to civilians. And so that's kind of what we see with these different pictures here. I think it was I thought I had one of the field. Sorry guys. These are actually just descriptions of depictions of different city. So we see that one, and we see Glasgow there on the right. And then what's the one on the left? Dang it, now I can't see. Oh yeah, the one on the left there is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I mean, we see that whether it was that atomic bomb or just the blitzkrieg, kind of that Germany enacted upon the British Isles, just lots of devastation. And you can definitely feel a sense with the people in that picture of just kind of the heaviness of the destruction, and probably the confusion and the sadness and the fear. All right, so there we go. So I was close on my estimate. I'm pretty sure I said 60 million people died in World War II, and according to my numbers there, it would be 61 million. So I did pretty good there, right? And then we say, as far as the physical devastation, so the cost to like rebuild towns and to rebuild nature and to build back up the agricultural fields, we'd say that was somewhere in the range of $4 trillion. And that's interesting, because at this point in history, that money figure didn't even exist. I think maybe we might have gone up to the billions, maybe by the 40s. I don't think we did. I think that didn't come around till the 60s, actually. But I'm saying, but my point with that is that, just that's an unfathomable amount of money, and that just denotes the unfathomable amount of destruction that took place. And despite all of that, though, there are some good things that came out of World War II. I know it's kind of hard to say that, but there were, and a lot of it has to come to, and the best thing that happened was decolonization. Even though there's a lot of conflict that goes along with this part of history, and there's still a lot of countries that are still trying to rebuild themselves and break free from that, those shadows of colonialism. We still, the good thing about it is that we do start to see more people come up, more people standing up, more people having their self-determinism, and finding their voice. And that's a good thing, because in that diversity, once again, we see how it affects us on those social cultural levels, things like works of art, things like food, things like fashion, things just like, you know different theories and ideologies. We wouldn't have any of those things if we were all the same and we all did everything the same way, despite that oh well, I was going to say that differently. But that was one of the main things with Hitler, and this idea of the Aryan race. It was all about making everybody the same, and that's never going to happen. So at the end of World War II, just like with World War I, we start to see the leaders get together and they have these different conferences. And more so with World War II, these conferences are extremely important because they really do set the stage for the Cold War era, which is, what we start getting into. I believe next week we start talking about that, week 5. Yeah, we might talk about decolonialism first. I can't remember, but anyway. But my point is that it's at these conferences that we start to see the differences and in these governmental ideology, these political ideologies of how leaders should be, how countries should be run, how resources should be managed, and we also start to see the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union start to build. And so I like this picture of the Yalta conference, because once again, it's trying to get into people's minds, trying to get a feel of what was going on at this time and what people were thinking that allowed us to make the decisions that we did, right? And I think what we see here, it's not so much like a depressing atmosphere, but kind of a sober, kind of relaxed atmosphere, especially if we look at our 3 leaders there. We have Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. Now, if you remember back to our pictures from World War One, you remember of Churchill, much more relaxed, very happy and smiling, and everybody was kind of happy and smiling, and so we definitely see the different dynamics in these men's relationship because we don't have that, do we? You can see it seems very. I said relaxed, but at the beginning, but I meant to say tense, the opposite of that, right? Because I was thinking of Churchill. I confused myself there. But with this one, we see that opposite. They're very stern. Everybody seems a little more tense, a little more wound up tight. Even in the background, everybody looks a little tense and more stern there. So we see that even though we acknowledge these as being, the grand leaders, the winners of World War II, we see that things just aren't quite right. Right? And then as we move along with those conferences, when once we get to the Potsdam one, that's when we really, basically Stalin and Roosevelt would just leave. Or was that Truman by that time? I believe that was Roosevelt at that one. But anyway, my point is, this is basically the one where the big fight blew up and both sides left, and it was kind of like, I'll show you type mentality, right? And then we start to see, it was Truman. See, I knew it was, I thought Roosevelt was already out of office by that time. So we also see that the way that Germany, especially Berlin, was broken up at the end of World War II, it was broken up into those different districts with each country, the United States, France, and Great Britain were running western side of Berlin, and then you had the Soviets on the eastern side. And so there were just a lot of problems of getting resources to the people on the eastern side. A lot of that was a political game because of these different ideologies between those leaders. And then when it came to election time, and once again, we see a conflict of interest with Truman demanding elections and Stalin just all out refusing. And so, that led, that created a lot of tension. And so we start to see kind of the Soviets maybe expanding their ideas of communism out into other countries a little more. And so we have the beginning of the Cold War era. And we call it the Cold War era because there was never any fighting between the United States and the Soviet Unions, like directly. Like, they never, the Soviets never came here to US soil. We never went on Soviet soil. And it was more, but despite that, there was a lot of bloodshed during the Cold War era. And it was mainly because the Soviet and the United States, they were both equally to blame for this, were using other countries, these smaller countries, kind of as puppets. And so, we see a lot of political disintegration, I actually think is the word, during the Cold War era, because they were people were pitted in this. You either had to side with the United States and capitalism, or you had to go with the Soviets and communism. And so that was confusing for people because of the whole colonial system and what people experienced under that. It made capitalism seem less appealing and communism more appealing. And so that's something that we a little bit more once we get into the Cold War era. But I think it's important just to kind of point out because, once again, as human beings, we all want to be heard. We all want to be a part of the pack. We all want to have our place in the pack, right, guys? We want to be a part of the group and we want to be liked by other people. And so when we start getting, moving up those ladders to manage us more in those collective groups, we, well, first of all, we can't divide ourselves, but we have to recognize our uniqueness. And we have to recognize too that, propaganda is still something that is used today. And so there are some things that we have been taught that we do kind of have a skewed perception on because we're being taught about it from a more American point of view. And so, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. Actually, I am saying it's a little bad. I'm saying it's bad because we never want to go with just one point of view. Never lock yourself in one way of looking at something because there are multiple ways to look at something. And the way that we learn to work together more is by creating that space for more understanding of what makes us different and what makes us unique. Because like I said, we need all of that in order to survive and in order to be human beings. And so with this slide, it's just basically another map. And I mean, I can't really remember all the countries that we had on our last map a few slides ago. But what we see by the end of World War II is we definitely see a changing face. Once again, we see these new groups emerging. We see these old groups kind of coming in and exerting their dominance too. And like I said, this all plays a key role in the next uh, 50 years of history, pretty much. We are kind of still in the middle of this end of the Cold War era in many, many ways. So like I said, we'll get to the rest of the class looking at that because it's definitely a heavy period of time. And like I said, a lot of what was going on there, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it really plays into just the political dynamics that we see in our world today. Not just those political dynamics, but also those, like the different wars and battles that we have found ourselves in since these great wars. And what's most alarming about the Cold War era is that in all of human history, I mean, you guys, you got to think about it. If we want to go and note back to the first humans, Australopithecines, Lucy, our first ancestor there, talking about 4.2 million years ago. So bear with me. If we go from 4.2 billion years to the beginning of the atomic bomb in the 1940s, that's a long period of time. And yes, we had fights, and yes, we had people killing each other, but being able to mass destruction, wipe us all out with the click of a button, that's very new to us as human beings, and it's very dangerous. So like I said, we'll get into that more starting next week. So all right, guys, so for this week, like I said, your assignment is to write about some piece of art from the Holocaust. So you have to do a poem and a painting, I believe is. Did I miss a slide there? I believe it's a poem and a painting, or you get the choice. You choice of break those up, but I know you have to at least do 2 of those. And basically, what I want to do, I mean, you guys know if you want to go and look at those basic tips for academic writing, you can review the end of the other lectures. And I actually have an announcement up where I specifically give you guys those formulas for academic writing and that formula for APA. So if you want to go check that out, so you can look over that again and to help you with writing this week, good deal. And then, if you check that out or if you have any kind of questions or anything, guys, just reach out to me, right? So what I have on this slide is I'm just giving you some different ways to cite a poem so that you have an example for when you go to do this for your assignment this week. And then I have those in-text citations, and basically, like I said, it looks like it's a little bit different, but it's really not. We still have that same formula. We have who wrote it, when did they write it, what is it, and where did you get it? And I think that's what messes us up. It's because that where did you get it information changes and looks so different. Look at that. That first one there by Cleveland is in a book that's edited by somebody else, but that's still where did you get it from? It's just it's the editor of this book by this publishing company. But then you go and you look at that one by Poe there, and you see that where did you get it from? Just retrieved from that URL address that I went and read it from, right? And so that looks really different, that it confuses us, but we have to remember when you break it back down to that simple formula, that information is just telling us this is where I got that source from, or this is where that source exists. That's a better way of saying it. Okay, guys. So, next, we have those in-text citations, and even with, if it's a poem, if it's a painting, if it's a map, if it's a graph, whatever, guys, we still follow that who wrote it and when did they write it. And then if you're going to do a direct quote where, copy and paste it in, you will add in that page number. And then if you paraphrase something, the new rule of APA is they want you to include that page number 2. And my biggest thing is that if it's copy and paste it, make sure you have the page number and make sure you have those quotation marks around that quote so it indicates what part is not yours. Okay, guys? And then with this, I just break it down a little more and give you a little bit more information there. There's like the basic rules of how to cite a painting in a work of art. And, once again, guys, same formula there. You see that reference entry, but because those, where did you get it from? What is the name of it? Those elements kind of change around. I have these tips in here, so you'll be able to figure out, put your elements where they need to be. Guys, and that about wraps up our lecture. I know I'm going a little long on this one. I apologize for that. But real quickly, to end us off, I want to go to our classroom and just quickly show you guys how to do a search in the library. Oh, oops. Okay, sorry. Accidentally paused it because I'm trying to get the web page to come up here and it won't let me. Hold on, guys. I'll get it. Okay, so I am sharing. Is what it's telling me. All right, so when you go to class, look on the left there on the tree, and you will see the library guides. And so you can go in. If you scroll down, if you see, there's also some good information on APA and writing in the library too. But if you can go and type in, say, if you wanted to battles of World War II, or looking for your historical figure you're doing your final presentation on, Jane Goodall, Osama bin Laden, George Washington, type their name in there. And that does give, under that general education one, it seems to be, in my experience, it's kind of more like book reviews that it gives you. And it's okay to use book reviews, guys. You can do those too. You probably don't want to use a bunch of them, though. That's a good thing when that's a good tip when it comes to your sources too. Try to break them up. So, if you have a book review, you have a couple journal articles, maybe you have a biography, or you have like a specific speech, or a piece of writing from that person you're talking about. It's good to have that mix, and especially like piece of writings or those primary resource or primary sources that were written, when that person was alive. What I want to point out here is that when you come down to the history databases, you see this academic search complete. And then I went and looked under the master file too, but I like the academic search complete because it takes you to EBSCOhost, and EBSCOhost is a really good database for finding, different subjects and different information. And so I just went in here, and as an example, I just typed in Nelson Mandela biography. So we'll say I'm doing my final presentation on Nelson Mandela, right? It's important when you come to do your search, make sure that you have these clicked over here. So you want to make sure it's the full text. You want to make sure that the peer reviewed check is marked too. And then when it comes to publication, this is where you can find primary sources. So let's say if you wanted to talk about Hitler. So what I would do if I had Adolf Hitler's name in there, I would go and change that and put like 1930 or 1940. So I try to find more of those primary sources written when he was alive. And so with this one, I just didn't do that, but I want to point that out that you can play around with dates, and it'll help get you back to primary sources. And then if you're having trouble finding sources, another good tip is to look at the resources that the art like an article you're reading. Who did they use as their sources? Oh, why won't that? Hold on. I was trying to show this to you. But that's a good little trick that we often don't think about. But if you just, like right there, I just opened this one, The Parallel Lives of Nelson Mandela. I think I've been logged out. I've locked myself out of class. It's not going to open it for me. See if it opens. It's not. Sorry, guys. I'll have to restart my computer, but no, don't do that. But my point is that when if I hadn't logged myself out and I went and opened that PDF file, at the end of articles and stuff, there's always a reference list, and so that's a good idea to go look through their list and see what the sources they use, because a lot of times you'll find primary sources in there. If you do a book, a biography, you're going to, they're going to have more primary sources listed in the back of those. And then you can just go do a search in the library, to find those sources. And lastly, if you do have trouble finding any sources, of course, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you with that. And then you can also reach out to the librarian. Show me how to do that. I'm afraid of myself. There it is. Ask us. If you use that Ask Us link, the librarians are more than happy to help you find resources and information. So, like, say, if you find a book or something that you want to use and you can't find it in the library, email the librarians. A lot of times we'll do interlibrary loans, is what they're called. So it's if you email the librarian, give her all the information for that book, then she can go find a copy of that at another school's library, and then they'll send it to you. Sometimes they'll do it to where they'll make copies of it. If it's like maybe like just a little few page article you need, they'll make copies of it and they'll send that to you. And so you have a lot of different options when it comes to finding sources, and looking through these databases, asking the librarians, reaching out to your instructors. We're all tools that you can use, just to help make the work, less daunting for you. Don't stress yourself out if you can't find any new sources or something. Just reach out for help, guys. That's what all of us are here for, and we are more than happy to help you guys, do anything you need to be successful in your educational journey, because that transcends over into your lives outside of education too. So you can be great in all areas. So, all right, guys, that concludes our lecture for this week. I will EC you guys in the discussions. We've already got some great ones going on talking about the different battles. And so far, I know quite a few of you have already posted about that. And you'll see your grades later tonight, guys. And if you need anything, like I said, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I do appreciate all of you guys. You guys are rocking and doing awesome in class. And I know you have a lot of craziness going on with the COVID, and just, life in nursing is crazy in general. So keep up the great work, guys. And if you need anything, like I said, let me know. I'll see you in our discussions. All right, guys. Bye.